Hi, I'm Chris, and today we're exploring the R-Ware SplineCurve oscillator module for Voltage Modular. SplineCurve is a smooth, drawable oscillator that's based on splines. The algorithm ensures a continuous, low aliasing signal even at the wildest curve drawings. And that leads us directly to the star of the show, the curve canvas. The curve canvas is the centerpiece of SplineCurve. It not only shows the current waveform, but also lets you directly interface with it. Click and draw or drag with your cursor over the canvas to shape the curve. The curve consists of curve and control nodes. The curve nodes, the big hollow circles, directly guide the path of the line. The resulting spline will always traverse through these points. On the other hand, there are control points, the smaller grayish dots in between, that control the curvature of the waveform in between the curve nodes. The canvas is divided between these two types of nodes. In order to ease manipulating the curve, the canvas is split per node. You can see the stripe pattern in the back. The darker stripes correspond to curve nodes, while the lighter stripes correspond to the control nodes. You can click and drag anywhere within a stripe to place and manipulate the corresponding node. You can also drag the cursor over multiple stripes to influence multiple nodes with one stroke. Directly below the canvas, there are the oscillator controls and the curve controls. Let's start with the right hand side. The fade in and fade out controls apply a triangular window to the volume contour of the curve to ease it in and out. The start or target value hereby is given by the value of the first and last node respectively. The link toggle button connects the last step to the first step to ensure a smooth looping curve without jumps or any other discontinuities. It is recommended to have this toggle enabled in oscillator mode to mitigate aliasing. Right next to the link toggle, there's the points knob that sets the number of spline segments for the curve by setting the number of points, the curve nodes, for the curve. A smaller number of points tends to sound smoother and warmer, but more dull, whereas a higher number of points tends to sound more bright and brittle, but also richer and timbre. You can use more points to draw more intricate curves, with more control over the resulting shape. Lastly, there's the Smart Randomizer button. This is your gateway to an endless world of tones and timbres. Clicking this button randomizes all curve and control points to produce a new curve with new sonic attributes. Speaking of endless possibilities, let's move to the left-hand side controls in this row. Here is the mode switch that transforms SplineCurve from a high-quality, low-aliasing oscillator into a tempo-syncable LFO, a one-shot envelope generator, and even a Waveshaper. The frequency or tempo controls adapt to the chosen mode automatically to provide a seamless and efficient user experience. In oscillator and shaper mode, oversampling is enabled. The oversampling factor can be selected with the oversampling factor switch. Higher oversampling ratios result in even lower aliasing at the cost of more CPU usage and a slight distortion of the resulting waveform. In LFO and ENV mode, the oversampling factor switch is replaced by the sync switch, which lets you pick between free and tempo sync. When synced is selected, the octave and fine knob transform into a ratio control. Here you can freely select a numerator and a denominator to set a tempo synced interval that the LFO and envelope then use. In all cases, the pitch CV input on the very left side takes a 1 volt per octave signal. As a guide, this CV doubles the frequency for every additional positive volt received or halves the frequency for every negative volt received accordingly. You can further fine-tune the frequency with the TSET FM knob that lets you set a linear frequency offset. In oscillator mode, the bass tuning is C2, which is roughly 65 Hz. In LFO and ENV mode, the bass tuning of free tempo mode is lowered to roughly 0.5 Hz, which translates to the note C-5. In shaper mode, all of the frequency manipulation options are unavailable, as the curve is driven by the PMCV input signal instead of its internal phasor. PMCV is also available in all other modes. Speaking of, the bottom row of controls and CV inputs deal with manipulating the phase and frequency of the oscillator. At the very start, there's a retrigger button with accompanying CV trigger input that resets the curve to its starting position and functions as the trigger to let the curve run once in env mode. The phase control moves the phase either to the left or right, which offsets the starting position. You can use the PMCV input for phase modulation to generate rich and unique timbres, and in Waveshaper mode, this is the signal input. Next to the phase modulation input lies the phase distortion section. In order, we have phase distortion in X and Y direction, phase squeeze or stretch, and phase bend. X and Y distort the phasor, which is basically a straight ramp up, to go through an arbitrary point given by X and Y. This speeds up and slows down the phasor, which results in a modified waveform as indicated by the orange outline in the curve canvas. The squeeze or stretch control, PDS, will squeeze the waveform to the middle or stretch it to its sides from the center. Last, the phase bend will curve the phasor up or down, which bends the waveform to the left or right accordingly. All of these controls are of course modulatable by CV and even audio rate signals. And yet another modulation option is given by the through zero linear frequency modulation, which is labeled as TZFM. An audio signal patched into this CV input will give rich and pitch stable timbres similar to the phase modulation but slightly smoother. Adding a DC offset or having the DC offset already printed into the modulating signal will get the waveform wiggling and moving. You can use a DC blocker prior to going into the CV input to remove this behavior. Or you can try to counter the DC offset with the knob by adding an opposing offset. SplineCurve is equipped with its own amplifier section that features amplitude and ring modulation. You can switch the output signal from being bipolar, positive and negative, to being unipolar, only positive. And the latter is mostly useful for envelopes though. At the end of SplineCurve's signal path is an optional anti-aliased high quality clipper and an optional DC blocker. You can enable or disable each with their corresponding switches.